our Community Builder Award. Please welcome Brian Lund. Thank you very much, David and Jim. Talk about community building. David and Jim kind of personify what it means to be community builders, so I thank David and Jim for their friendship and professionalism and everything else. On behalf of Arsenal Pulp Press, I want to say how honored we are to receive this award from the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, a group that we've long considered our friends and allies. As book publishers, writers are at the heart of what we do, so it is humbling and inspiring to be recognized not only for doing something that is our daily job, but something that we love doing, which is bringing our writers' works to life. I started out book publishing almost 30 years ago now, in 1984, as a student studying creative writing at the University of Victoria. My parents were first-generation Canadian. My father served in the Canadian Army and was stationed in Australia during World War II, and was one day away from being sent to the front lines before the war ended. But he and my mother, like other Chinese Canadians, were still not allowed to vote for another few years until 1947. My parents experienced the kind of systemic and personal prejudice that so many of their generation experienced. And as a result, they wanted their children to have the kind of life that was denied to them. Growing up in the 1960s, I was raised to speak English and encouraged to read as much as possible so that I might easily earn a job in the real world. But I realize now that this sent me on a path toward writing and literature. My most tragic Christmas gift I remember was a typewriter that I received at the age of 8. Like many people in this room, I started out my academic life wanting to become a writer. And I was fortunate to study with the likes of writers Jack Hodgins and Leon Rook, among others. But in 1984, as part of UVic's co-op writing program, I got a summer internship as a publishing assistant at what was then known as simply Pulp Press. I packed book orders, I took authors to media interviews, I read manuscripts, and I reorganized Pulp's first filing system. I also got to hang around with Pulp's early stalwarts, such as poet John Ferber, novelist Tom Osborne, his brother and my mentor Stephen Osborne, now the publisher of Geist magazine, and the late D.M. Fraser, one of Canada's greatest unsung writers, and Pulp's editor at the time, who would compose beautifully written rejection letters that were usually more than 2 or more pages long, typed on long yellow scrolls. Wow. When that summer was over and I returned to Victoria, I already knew that the world of book publishing is where I belonged. It's a cliche to say, but I am nostalgic for those simpler days when there were more than 25 independent bookstores in Vancouver alone, including 9 locations of Duffy Books, 4 locations of Blackberry Books. There was also the Mall Book Bazaar, which became Granville Book Company on the Granville Strip, William McKinley's, which was an architectural bookstore, Proprioception was devoted to art theory books, and Chief's Mass, which was the first Aboriginal bookstore. I would, whenever one of our new books was published, I would enjoy jumping in my car and delivering stock around the city to booksellers who were grateful and enthusiastic for the service. There was no internet then, of course, but then, more importantly, there were no multinational online booksellers like Amazon to compete with. Storefront leases were relatively cheap, and ebooks were non-existent. Today, the book industry has been completely transformed by the digital revolution, and the kind of multinational book selling and publishing that would have one believe that bigger is better. Coles merged with W.H. Smith, which became Chapters, which then bought out Indigo to control 60 to 70% of every book purchased in Canada today. As well, McLeod Stewart, the largest and most venerated Canadian-owned publisher in the country, was purchased by Random House, which then merged with Penguin to become one of the world's most dominant publishers. But I would argue that in order to survive in what has become a cutthroat industry, smaller is better. And by smaller, I mean nimble enough to respond quickly and efficiently to the vagaries of the industry, and creative enough to find new revenue streams and new opportunities for audience development, all of which benefit the writers we publish. We've always prided ourselves on the close-knit relationship we've developed with our writers, from editorial through production, through to marketing and promotion. And we are eternally grateful for their trust and support. One of those writers, actually the story is actually Jim mentioned in the book, that Muzo, so I probably won't go into that. But shortly after, on the day that Chinatown Ghosts, which was Jim's poetry book, which was in fact the first Asian Canadian poetry book ever published in Canada, a few years later, Jim and Andy Kwan came to us with Swallowing Clouds, which was an anthology of Chinese Canadian poetry that we published in 1999. The book is 14 years old now, and in addition to writing, including poems by such established writers of the time as Evelyn Lau, Fred Waugh, and Paul E, it included many who were being published at the time in book form for the first time. Today, it's astonishing to realize how many of those new young writers have gone on to publish their own books of poetry and fiction, such as Lydia Kwa, Larissa Lai, Fiona Tinwei Lam, Lydia Kwa, and Rita Wong. Since Swallowing Clouds and Chinatown Ghosts, we've published other books by Asian Canadian writers as part of our mandate to publish literature that expands our ideas about ourselves and the world we live in, and to counter the traditional master narrative of our country with points of view that are decidedly outside of the mainstream. We are particularly proud of publishing a new edition of Larissa Lai's beautiful novel, When Fox is 1,000, Terry Watada's sweeping novel, Kuroshio, The Blood of Foxes, about the Japanese coming to North America, artist Gu Zhong's The Yellow Pear, about his experience as a new immigrant from mainland China, and of course David Wong's extraordinary and groundbreaking graphic novel, Escape to Copenhagen. But our task of connecting books with readers around the world pales in comparison to the solitary creative work done by our writers, who, despite their relatively paltry compensation, are passionate in their dedication to tell the stories that they want and need to tell. With this in mind, I want to thank Jim Wong Chu, David Wong, Larissa Lai, Terry Watada, Hiromi Goto, Gu Zhong, Andy Kwan, Tamai Kobayashi, Ashok Mathur, Wade Compton, David Cherry-Andy, and so many others who are trusting us with their books and their stories. I also want to thank the team at Arsenal with whom I share this award, Robert, Susan, Jerry Lee, and Sonara. They are a creative and hardworking lot, and I, as well as our writers, appreciate them for their professionalism and dedication, whether it is editing manuscripts, designing book covers, putting together author tours, or getting books onto bookstore shelves. Finally, I wish to thank the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop not only for this award, but for the good work that they do to promote and assist writers across the country, and for giving new generations of writers the confidence and skill to tell their own stories for generations to come. Thad McElroy, who was a publishing assistant who was once Pulp's sales director back in the 1970s, once said that it's hard to get publishing out of your blood, and I agree. It is a terrifying, backbreaking business, but one that I personally can't imagine ever leaving. So on behalf of Arsenal Pulp Press, I thank you for this wonderful vote of confidence and recognition. Thank you.